You're listening to Nocturnal Nightmares. While the world sleeps peacefully, we open the door to what lies beneath. The stories that surface in silence, the fears that rise in the dark. These are not dreams, they are reminders. Stay with us. And don't close your eyes just yet. The instant my fingers closed around the worn leatherette, a tremor of wrongness vibrated up my arm. I should have fled that blighted motel right then, abandoned the room to its dust and shadows, but a ravenous curiosity, sharp and insistent, had already sunk its teeth in. By the time the full weight of my trespass settled upon me, escape was a forgotten dream. It was meant to be fleeting, this pause, a single night's surrender between the monotony of the highway and the promise of California sun. A new beginning awaiting me. The Pinewood Motel slumped by the roadside, a skeletal 2-story relic dreaming fitfully of its prime, perhaps half a century gone. Cheapness was its only virtue, exhaustion my only guide. I stared into the sparsely populated lot as twilight bled purple across the sky. Inside, the air hung thick with the ghosts of stale tobacco and the cloying sweetness of chemical pine. Agnes the clerk presided over the counter, her face a road map of faded ink and a calcified grimace. She barely registered my presence, her gaze glued to a dog-eared tabloid before sliding the key to room 8 across the scarred formica. 11's checkout, she rasped, her attention already elsewhere. A flicker in her gaze, a fractional pause as her fingers released the key. Signals I should have heeded, perhaps. But the long day's drive had scoured my senses raw. Sleep, oblivion, that was the siren call. Room 8 offered precisely the level of faded grandeur I'd anticipated. Wallpaper peeling like sunburnt skin. A mattress that sighed wearily under imagined weight. A television set squatting in the corner like an ancient cyclopean idol. Yet a surprising tidiness pervaded the space, and the shower pulsed with unexpected vigor. A fragile hope for decent rest began to bloom, only to wither the moment I saw it. A dark edge protruding from beneath the bed's valance. Detritus from a prior occupant, surely. Bending closer, however, revealed not trash, but a book. A journal, its cover rubbed smooth by countless hands, whispering of secrets held within its brittle pages. Opening it was a violation, I knew even then. A trespass against forgotten sorrows. Yet, the pull was irresistible. Initially, the entries confirmed my mundane expectations. Notes on tedious business meetings, laments about inclement weather, the dull rhythm of a life passing through. But then, the cadence shifted. The script grew ragged, clawing across the page. The entries fractured into desperate shards of thought. "This place isn't right," one declared. "The walls, they seem to breathe when my back is turned. And the sounds, dear God, the sounds in the deep night." An icy current traced my spine, yet my fingers turned the page, compelled. What followed was starker still. Tried the door today. Locked fast. Not by my hand, I swear it, when I forced it. The hall outside, it wasn't the same. Longer. Endless doors mirroring each other into vanishing point. Impossible. This can't be real. My own hands trembled now, mirroring the frantic script. Each subsequent page descended deeper into paranoia and dread. The author spoke of shadows detaching themselves from corners, of susurrations slithering from within the plaster, of a presence that materialized bedside in the darkest hours, a silent, watchful sentinel. The final entry, a near illegible scrawl, screamed from the page, "Reader, flee now, while you still can, before this place claims you too, like me, like all of us." I snapped the diary shut, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. A hoax, some elaborate cruel jest left to unnerve weary travelers. Yet, as the silence pressed in, the room itself felt altered, imbued with a sudden biting chill. The shadows pooled thicker, seeming to lengthen, to reach. Decision struck like lightning. I wasn't staying to test the diary's veracity. Bag snatched, I lunged for the door. The knob refused to turn, solid, immovable, as if fused to the frame. Panic, cold and sharp, began to bloom in my chest. The window. My next thought. But it too resisted, sealed tight against my frantic efforts. And then I saw it, through the grimy pane, a detail that iced my veins. The parking lot. No longer near empty. It was now crammed bumper to bumper with automobiles. Hulking shapes from the 50s, sleek lines from the 70s, boxy forms from the 80s, all layered thick with the undisturbed dust of ages, as if they had waited here, silent and patient for decades. Recoiling, my thoughts scattered like startled birds. A waking nightmare? Fatigue playing tricks on a frayed mind? I squeezed my eyes shut, commanded steadiness with a ragged breath, counted. 1, 2, 3. A sound surfaced, faint, insistent, a dry scratching from within the walls. 4, 5, 6. Was the space constricting, the ceiling lowering by imperceptible degrees? 7, 8, 9. The scratching intensified, joined by whispers, indistinct yet intimately close. 10. My eyes flew open. The room remained, superficially unchanged, yet the very air thrummed with a palpable, static charge that raised the hairs on my skin. And the door. The door stood ajar, gaping open onto a hallway that plunged into an impossible Stygian infinity. Every nerve ending shrieked caution. Stay, urged reason. Wait for daylight, for this phantasm to dissolve. But the room had become a cage, the whispers weaving a suffocating net, the shadows conspiring. I couldn't remain, hesitantly, compelled. I stepped across the threshold. It was like stepping into another dimension. The motel's cheap decay vanished, replaced by lustrous dark wood paneling and wallpaper that shimmers with intricate, unsettling patterns in the low light. Doors, identical and numerous, marched away in both directions, an endless colonnade receding into shadow. I began to walk, a single objective burning: find the stairs, the lobby, the exit from this madness. But the hallway offered no egress, no ascent or descent, merely door after identical door. Time lost all meaning in that corridor. Minutes or lifetimes might have passed. Faint sounds occasionally bled from behind the closed doors. Fragments of conversation, a muffled sob, once chillingly, the echo of my own laughter from some long-vanished moment. Finally, depleted, teetering on the edge of psychic collapse, I stopped before one unremarkable door. Some intuition, perhaps a nascent understanding, guided my hand. The knob turned effortlessly. I stood in my childhood bedroom, utterly, terrifyingly perfect. Toys from a forgotten era lay scattered. Posters of adolescent idols adorned the walls. And seated on the edge of a familiar bedspread was a small girl, me, age 10, her smile bright but failing to ignite her eyes. "You made it," she announced, her voice strangely resonant. "We've waited such a long time." I stumbled backward, shaking my head, denying the impossible. Not real. Not real. I spun, seeking the hallway, escape, but it were gone. In its place stood my college dormitory room, another me, older, hunched over a desk. "Don't you recognize it?" this iteration inquired softly. "You checked in. We all did." Whirling again, frantically seeking an anchor, I found only more rooms, snapshots of my past. Our first apartment, a sterile office cubicle, transient spaces from forgotten trips. And in each, a version of Elara watched, their eyes mirroring the same profound, inescapable sadness. "Leaving isn't an option," they chorused, a seamless blend of voices. "None of us ever leave. This is where we belong now." Something fractured deep within me. Memories unbidden and unwelcome surged forth. Recollections not of one arrival, but of countless check-ins at this very motel. Reading this diary, the desperate escape attempts, the inevitable return, a crushing weight of realization descended. The cross-country drive had never begun. California was a mirage. I had always been here, ensnared, condemned to reenact this arrival, this discovery, this despair, endlessly. As the truth settled, the phantom rooms dissolved like mist. I found myself back in room 8, the air thick with the scent of stale cigarettes and cheap wine. It was unchanged, precisely as I'd first found it, and there, beneath the bed, lay the diary, its corner peeking out like a waiting serpent. With hands that felt ancient and unsteady, I retrieved it, turning automatically to the final, violated page. There, inscribed in script I recognized with sickening certainty as my own, were the words, "Reader, flee, now, while you still can, before this place claims you too, like me, like all of us." Carefully, ritualistically, I slid the diary back into its hiding place. Then, I sat on the edge of the sagging bed and waited. Soon, footsteps would approach. A key would turn in the lock. A new guest would enter room 8. The cycle, unbroken, would turn once more, because the Pinewood Motel holds its guests close. Check-in is always possible. Check-out is never permitted. This chronicle was never meant for other eyes, yet the silence festers, and I must spill the words before they consume me entirely. Beneath my feet, in the subterranean dark of this house, lies a door, bolted, sealed, and from beyond its unyielding timber, something persistently utters my name, Ilias. Not imagined, not a trick of the wind. A voice, distinct, threading through the wood itself. It began one moonless night. It has not ceased. I set this down now, a desperate cartography of dread, because the solitude of this place is threatening to unmoor my sanity. 6 months have dissolved since I crossed the threshold of this place. A modest structure, 2 stories perched behind a groaning porch, its kitchen anachronistic, its cellar possessed of a permanent, seeping chill. An unnerving quietude reigned upon my arrival. The cellar door, ancient and bound, caught my eye immediately, though its significance remained dormant. A formidable padlock, blooming with rust, secured it. Hinges like clenched fists, wood of profound thickness. I recall testing it idly during that first descent into the gloom. It offered no concession, solid as bedrock. A forgotten storeroom, I surmised, belonging to lives lived here before mine. No key presented itself, and the tyranny of unpacked boxes claimed my attention. I let it be. Weeks bled into one another, measured in strokes of paint on plaster, the shifting geography of furniture. Work demanded my hours, pulling me out at dawn, returning me under twilight. The cellar devolved into a repository for detritus, cast-off clothing, crates of dormant tools, the flotsam of a life reluctant to fully purge itself. The sealed portal below became a footnote, locked and inert, offering no temptation to my preoccupied mind. The world upstairs held challenges enough. Then came the night, sleep's soft edge beckoning near midnight, when a cadence disturbed the quiet. Faint, initially. An exterior sound, perhaps. A branch's skeletal finger tapping glass. I rose, prowled the perimeter, inspected windows. Nothing amiss. Yet, upon returning to the cusp of slumber, the sound intensified. A percussion, rhythmic and deliberate. Not random, a measured beat, a pause, a beat, as if awaiting acknowledgement. A knot tightened low in my belly. My own pulse became a frantic drum against my ribs. The source, I realized with a lurch, was subterranean. From the cellar. Panic is not my usual recourse for stray noises, but this felt imbued with intent. It possessed a structure. Grasping a torch, pulling on shoes, I descended. Each stair tread groaned under my weight. The house exhaled a cold deeper than the night air, or perhaps it was merely the ice forming in my veins. As I reached the cellar entryway, the rapping ceased. I nudged the door open, fumbled for a switch. A weak bulb cast pallid light, illuminating the path towards the far wall, towards the unyielding door. Stillness reigned in the main space. Cautiously, I stepped onto the concrete floor, my knuckles white on the banister, the torch beam quivering. My own breath, shallow and ragged, filled the silence. I approached the sealed threshold. All appeared unchanged. The padlock shed in ochre flakes, the wood dark and solid. Then a flicker of motion in the timber itself, a subtle outward pressure, a momentary warp gone in an instant. I froze, limbs turning to water. A strange heat searing my chest. The torch beam locked onto the door. Again, the surface flexed, as if something substantial pressed against it from within. And then, my own name, Elias, drifted through the grain of the wood, a chillingly familiar whisper, intimate as if spoken from mere feet away. Retreat. Instinct screamed for flight, for the solace of the upper floors, for a frantic call to whom? Who answers such a call in the dead of night? The rapping remained silent, but my name reverberated in the hollows of my mind. I scanned the damp space, desperate for logic. A draft, resonant pipes? No pipe ever formed a human name so clearly. It was a voice. One last lingering look at the impassive wood. Then backward steps until my heel found the stairs. I ascended without turning, securing the upper cellar door behind me, a flimsy barrier against the unknown. Sleep that night was a tattered refuge. The following day, I waged war against the memory, burying it under emails and errands. Imagination, I insisted, a waking dream. But as dusk bled into the sky, unease returned, settling over the house like fine dust. Silence reigned again, heavy and expectant. Television offered hollow distraction. My thoughts gravitated downwards, tethered to the locked enigma. Curiosity, sharp and insistent, gnawed at me. A compulsion to test it, to listen again. Yet counterbalancing this was a visceral dread, a leaden weight anchored by the memory of that voice. Too real. Around 11, resolve hardened. If the sounds returned, I would confront them. And return they did, punctual as a phantom clock striking midnight. The same methodical rapping, slow, spaced, like Morse code tapped out by spectral fingers. I rose from the sofa, torch gripped tight once more, and compelled myself down the groaning stairs. The instant my shoes met the cold concrete, the rhythm shifted. Faster now, urgent, almost frantic, as if my presence had been sensed, welcomed. 10 feet back from the door, I stood my ground. The torch beam pinned the wood, revealing faint tremors accompanying each knock. A stale earthen odor, thick with mildew, emanated from beneath the threshold, coating my tongue. My mouth turned to parchment. My palms grew slick. The rapping ceased abruptly. Silence descended, thick and watchful. Then the utterance, twice this time, my name spaced by heartbeats. Ilyas. Ilyas. A current traced my spine. My pulse throbbed visibly in my neck. A frantic bird trapped beneath the skin. I forced sound from my throat. A shaky query. Who's there? Silence answered, again louder. Who is it? Nothing. Hesitantly, I reached out, laid my palm flat against the door. The wood felt cold, slick with a faint dampness. And then, a delicate pressure met mine from the other side, like a hand mirroring my own, pressing back. Thought dissolved. Snatched my hand away as if burned, stumbled backward, spun, and fled the stairs, slamming the upper door, twisting the lock with trembling fingers. Sleep became an impossibility that night. My body hummed with residual adrenaline, a persistent tremor beneath the skin. Nausea churned, not from illness, but from sheer, unadulterated tension. In the ensuing days, I wrestled with options. The door must be breached or perhaps removed entirely. Yet, the prospect paralyzed me. That voice, though devoid of overt malice, felt intrinsically wrong. A locksmith. The archaic padlock seemed fused by time and rust. Bolt cutters. Each time the thought solidified, sweat beaded on my palms, my throat constricted. Hesitation won. The intrusions began to bleed into daylight. Fainter, yes, but undeniably present. Pouring coffee in the kitchen. A muted tap-tap from below. Watching television. A brief, solitary knock, always from the cellar. Relaxation became a foreign concept. My nerves frayed, stretched taut. Normal household creaks sent jolts through me. The refrigerator's hum became momentarily sinister. The house itself felt complicit, watchful. One afternoon, armed with a hammer, I descended, resolve flickering. Pry the hinges, perhaps? Test the surrounding wood for weakness. Approaching the threshold, I felt it again. That subtle shift, like an inhalation, held on the other side. My legs threatened to buckle. I retreated a few paces, breathing deep, trying to anchor myself. "Just do it," I commanded silently. Stepping forward, I brought the hammer's claw to a rusted hinge, tested its purchase. Immovable. The nails were sunk deep, wedded to the wood by time and corrosion. A low groan emanated from the door itself, and then a whisper, barely audible but sharp with command. "Stop," directed at me. Ice flooded my veins. I scrambled up the stairs, nearly pitching forward, abandoning the hammer on the concrete floor. That was the moment the lock became permanent in my mind. Days warped into weeks. The presence behind the timber grew bolder, less subtle. Random shifts and rustles reached my ears. Low susurrations, like captured breath, escaping slowly. My senses remained perpetually heightened. The cellar became hostile territory, entered only for dire necessities. Laundry, a forgotten tool. Each descent felt like breaching enemy lines. Nightfall amplified the siege. The rapping endured, sometimes for an hour, punctuated by unnerving silences. My name, repeated Elias, 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 always in that same neutral, observational tone. Not angry, not pleading, factual, as if calibrating the sound, ensuring its reception. Occasionally, standing upstairs, I felt a subtle vibration through the floorboards, a resonance that sickened me, suggesting displaced air, movement below. Headphones offered little solace. The percussion seemed to travel through bone. Sleep fractured into restless dozing, punctuated by jolts of wakefulness. Convinced the door had yielded, that footsteps echoed in the house. I installed a deadbolt on the upper cellar door, a gesture towards security. Testing it repeatedly offered a sliver of comfort, enough for fractured sleep, though nightmares persisted. In them, I invariably stood before the locked door as it imploded inward, revealing only void. Yet the voice remained, echoing my name in the featureless dark. One evening, seeking normalcy, I invited Micah over. The cellar remained unspoken territory. We occupied the living room, shared beers, watched a game, an island of manufactured calm until, faint but distinct, a knock resonated from below. Micah glanced at me, brow furrowed. I offered a shrug, a muttered excuse about old pipes, feeling the blood drain from my face. He didn't press. He left hours later, plunging me back into the charged solitude. Functionality began to fray at the edges. Each step near the cellar door became hesitant. A knock sent tremors through my hands. Lights burned through the night. Darkness seemed to amplify the sounds. I lay awake, staring at shadowed ceilings, counting breaths, anticipating the next soft rap, the next whispered iteration of my name. The apex of terror arrived 2 nights past. A necessary foray into the cellar, checking the water heater. Crouched near room's center, examining the base, I heard it. A scraping against the locked door, like fingernails dragged across rough wood. My stomach plummeted. I whipped around, torch beam finding the door. The scraping ceased. Silence taut and absolute. I held my breath, waiting. Then a single knock, heavier than before, resonant, my gaze locked onto the wood. I saw it bulge outward again, distinctly this time, perhaps an inch or two, before snapping back, as if yanked by an unseen force. A strangled gasp escaped me. I stumbled backward, equilibrium failing. No words formed, only flight. Up the stairs, two at a time, lungs burning, throat raw. I slammed the upper door, shot the deadbolt, then retreated, eyes fixed on the knob, half expecting it to twist. It remained still. Since that night, I have not descended. The knocking persists, a constant subterranean pulse beneath the noise. I used to drown it. Television at high volume, ceaseless music. I performed the rituals of normalcy. Cook, clean, work, but the knowledge is always there. An undercurrent to every waking moment. The sealed door below, the entity behind it, calling my name. It never shouts, it never pleads. It simply knocks and repeats my name. Elias, Elias, patient, persistent, waiting for the lock to turn. Leaving this house whispers like a siren's call. Pack, flee, find an anonymous rental. Easier dreamt than done. How does one sell a house with a whispering, knocking secret in its depths? And darker still, a morbid fragment of me resists departure without knowing. The hammer lies where I dropped it. A crowbar rests nearby. The urge to shatter the impasse surges, fierce and desperate. But then, I remember cold pressure against my palm. The sound of my name echoing in the stagnant air. That final visceral scrape against the wood. And the resolve evaporates. My legs turn to lead. My hands shake. I retreat upstairs once more. So the cycle endures. I inhabit this space. I hear the summons. I feign deafness. Shadows make me flinch. Sometimes, I drift close to the cellar door, a masochistic test of nerve. The presence behind the locked wood remains tireless. The knocks do not fade. The voice does not weaken. If anything, its persistence sharpens. Yet, it hasn't breached the barrier. Perhaps it cannot. Perhaps it merely waits for an invitation, an answer. I possess none. It has been 2 days since my last descent. Tonight, around 11, 3 emphatic knocks reverberated through the floor, felt in the soles of my feet. It spurred me to write this. This isn't crafted for effect, not a fiction to entertain. This is the architecture of my current existence. Even now, as I type, I hear a faint, insistent rapping. My name, Elias, whispered low, muffled but unwavering. How much longer this fragile truce can hold, I cannot say. My nerves are unraveling, thread by thread. A perpetual ache resides behind my eyes. My fingers tremble against the keys. I sit bathed in the sterile glare of every light I own, breathing shallow, rapid breaths. I crave a solution, an ending, but find only the ongoing stalemate. The presence will not relent. The door remains locked, and I remain here, in my own home, trapped face to face with something on the other side of a threshold I was never meant to cross. The city's relentless pulse had worn Elias thin, fraying the edges of his patience until only raw nerve remained. Escape beckoned, a siren song promising solace, and he'd answered its call by renting a remote sanctuary, a cabin swallowed whole by miles of dense woodland, far from any artery of civilization. He'd found it adrift in the digital sea, a listing whose images depicted rustic simplicity embraced by arboreal silence, the very antidote his soul craved. The journey itself was a shedding, the asphalt ribbon giving way to a serpentine dirt track that burrowed deeper into the forest's green heart. With each mile devoured, a quiet exhilaration bloomed within him, the thrill of absolute solitude. He arrived as twilight painted the sky in bruised hues of orange and purple. The cabin materialized in a small clearing, a humble structure of timber logs with a welcoming porch, precisely as the photographs foretold. A stone fire pit waited nearby, flanked by a generous stack of split wood. Beyond, the forest stood sentinel, an impenetrable wall of ancient trees. Parking the car, Elias hauled his meager luggage inside. The air hung thick and still, imbued with the earthy perfume of undisturbed dust and time. A scent less foul than forgotten. He threw open the windows, inviting the cool vesper breeze to circulate, and began the ritual of unpacking, settling into the deliberate absence of connection. No signal bars, no phantom glow of Wi-Fi. This disconnection was the point, the severing he desperately sought. Later, beneath a sky deepening towards indigo, Elias coaxed flames to life in the outdoor pit. Tree shadows stretched like grasping fingers across the clearing. He sat, mesmerized by the fire's dance, the percussive crackle of timber yielding to heat, the cool air kissing his face. Here was peace, stark and simple. Yet, as the embers glowed and darkness claimed the woods, a prickling awareness surfaced. The distinct, unnerving sensation of unseen eyes fixed upon him. A phantom weight pressed from the direction of the dense tree line. He chided himself. Paranoia, born of urban anxieties transplanted to the wild. Still, his gaze kept drifting towards the black spaces between trunks, half expecting a silhouette to detach itself from the gloom. When the fire dwindled to pulsing coals, he retreated indoors. The sturdy click of the lock echoed in the profound quiet. Windows secured, he surrendered to the mattress, the day's exhaustion settling like sediment. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, pregnant, amplifying the forest's subtle whispers. A skitter of leaves, the sigh of wind through pine needles. Sleep eventually claimed him. He surfaced into the pearly light of dawn filtering through the panes. Stretching, feeling the night's tension ease from his limbs, Elias decided on a brief exploration before breakfast. The morning woods were ethereal, hushed and draped in a delicate mist. Circling the cabin, absorbing the tranquil beauty, his gaze fell upon something incongruous. A small folded piece of paper resting innocently on the porch floorboards. A knot tightened in his stomach as he stooped to retrieve it. Unfolding the scrap revealed crude, hurried script. I saw you by the fire. Eyes traced a path down his spine. He snapped his head up, scanning the perimeter, the silent trees, the vacant clearing. Nothing. No one. Just the indifferent wilderness waking to a new day. A prank? Wayward hikers? The rationalizations felt hollow, flimsy, against the stark reality of his isolation. Miles from anywhere. Who would be here? He retreated inside, the heavy thud of the door sealing him in once more. The note lay accusingly on the rough-hewn kitchen counter, its 5 words echoing in the quiet. Someone had been close. Close enough to watch. Anxiety coiled within him, a serpent stirring. He forced down breakfast, attempted to reclaim the rhythm of repose, but the day was tainted. Every glance through the window was fraught with apprehension, his eyes searching the static tapestry of trees for movement, for a watcher who remained unseen. The forest's silence, once coveted, now felt suffocating, charged with unspoken threat. As dusk bled into night, he built another fire, a defiant act against the encroaching fear. He stared into the hypnotic flames, willing the unease away, insisting it was imagined. But the sensation returned, more potent than before, a palpable pressure against his back. His head swiveled constantly, eyes straining against the deepening shadows, heart leaping at every rustle, every snap of a twig. The fragile piece shattered, dousing the flames felt like surrender, but staying out was unbearable. Inside again, the ritual of locks and window checks felt less like security, more like a futile warding against an inevitable intrusion. Sleep was a distant shore. He lay rigid in bed, attuned to the cabin's groans, the forest's nocturnal murmurs. Each sound was magnified, distorted by fear into a potential threat. How long he lay suspended in that state, he couldn't say, but exhaustion eventually dragged him under. He awoke later, violently, heart hammering against his ribs, a suffocating dread filling the darkness. No specific sound had pierced his sleep, just an overwhelming conviction that something was fundamentally wrong. He slipped from bed, moving with ghost-like quiet through the moon-striped rooms, verifying locks, peering through each darkened window pane. The exterior remained unchanged, yet the feeling persisted. A presence just beyond the thin walls. Observing, defeated, he returned to bed, eyes wide open, listening to the profound, terrifying silence. Morning arrived not with relief, but with renewed dread. On the porch, precisely where the first had lain, rested another folded note. His hands trembled as he picked it up, the paper cool against his skin. I watched you check the locks. Nausea surged. The watcher hadn't just been outside. They'd been close enough to witness his movements inside the cabin. They knew his fear, his routines. They were watching even as he thought himself safe. He stumbled back inside, slamming and locking the door, breath coming in ragged bursts. Trapped, miles from help, utterly disconnected, utterly exposed. The cabin, his intended refuge, had become a cage, and the watcher held the key. The day passed in a haze of hypervigilance. Food remained untouched. He stayed indoors, away from the windows, listening. Every creak of the wood, every bird call sent jolts of adrenaline through him. The silence thickened, pressing down, heavy with anticipation. When night fell again, the fire pit remained cold. Elias huddled inside, every lamp blazing defiantly against the darkness. His back pressed to a solid wall. Sleep was unthinkable. He clutched a heavy kitchen knife, its cold steel a meager comfort against the formless terror, and waited, listening for the dawn that felt lifetimes away. Sometime in the deepest hours, fatigue ambushed him. He must have drifted, just for moments, because a distinct thump on the porch jolted him back to full heart-pounding awareness. Silence descended again, absolute and terrifying. He forced his legs to move, propelled by a morbid need to know. Peering through the door's small window, he saw it. Another note, same spot. His fingers, clumsy with fear, fumbled with the paper. He unfolded it, the words swimming before his eyes. "You look tired." That was the breaking point. Rational thought dissolved, replaced by pure, instinctual flight. He grabbed his bag, stuffing belongings in with frantic, uncoordinated movements. Keys shaken in the ignition, the engine roared to life, a jarring intrusion into the oppressive quiet. He didn't glance back at the cabin, that monument to his failed escape. He pointed the car down the winding dirt track and fled, tires spitting gravel, desperate to outrun the suffocating woods and the unseen eyes he felt boring into his back. Who left the notes? Why? The questions remain unanswered, ghosts that linger. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is still, the chill returns. The certainty that somewhere, someone is watching, waiting. The deep woods hold no more allure for Elias. Only the echo of inescapable dread. To mend a fractured spirit, Elias sought the deep woods, a pilgrimage away from the cacophony of recent months. Work, faces, the relentless urban hum, all burdens he hoped to shed miles from pavement, where the trees grew thick and civilization felt like a rumor. He drove until the roads thinned to tracks, finally shouldering his pack into a secluded hollow, bordered by a dense stand of timber, a place blessedly empty, resonant only with the earth's own voice. This isolation, profound and absolute, was the balm he craved. His sanctuary took shape near a stream's gentle murmur. A small tent pitched in a clearing, gear unpacked with methodical care. That first day unfolded in aimless wandering, a communion with the quietude. Sunlight dappled through the canopy, birdsong stitched the air, and the dry rustle of leaves underfoot seemed to draw the tension from his very sinews. Peace, elusive for so long, began to settle over him. As twilight painted the sky in bruised hues, exhaustion claimed him, a welcome, honest fatigue. A modest fire crackled to life, its flames dancing companions to his simple meal, pushing back the encroaching velvet dark. Beyond the fire's flickering perimeter, the forest was an abyss of shadow and soundlessness, punctuated only by the nearby water's song and the distant, mournful query of an owl. Elias sat entranced, watching embers pulse and flare, his thoughts finally adrift on the immense silence. Here, truly alone, the constriction in his chest eased. He could breathe. When the fire waned, he fed it more wood, then leaned back, a languor stealing over him, the world reduced to this small circle of warmth. Then a sound pricked the stillness. Faint, almost subliminal, yet sharp enough to sever his reverie. A disturbance in the undergrowth, just past the firelight's reach. He sat upright, senses straining against the fire's soft crackle. Not the quick scramble of a nocturnal creature. This was different. A slow, deliberate tread, weighted, careful, his pulse quickened, a frantic drum against the quiet. He scanned the impenetrable darkness, the tree line a wall of black, finding nothing. Imagination, he chided himself, just the wood settling. Yet the unease lingered, a cold premonition. He was not merely alone, but observed. He remained poised, a statue carved from attention, listening into the void. Minutes stretched, taut and silent. The sound did not return. A slow exhale escaped him, air he hadn't known he held. Nothing, he insisted, forcing his shoulders down. Just the forest breathing. But the tranquility he'd courted was irrevocably fractured. The comforting darkness now felt predatory. The trees closing ranks. His small fire seemed suddenly inadequate, a beacon rather than a shield. He resisted the urge to build it higher, unwilling to announce his presence more boldly, and instead let it subside, watching shadows writhe like living things. Eventually, the chill drove him towards his shelter. Dousing the last embers, he secured the tent flaps with meticulous care before crawling inside, burrowing into his sleeping bag. Sleep, however, remained elusive. Every snap of a twig, every sigh of wind through the branches became amplified, sinister, jolting him with fresh waves of adrenaline. The thin nylon walls felt terribly fragile. He must have succumbed to a shallow doze, for awareness returned with a jolt. Something brushed against the tent fabric. Softly, insistently. He shot upright, heart hammering, every nerve alight, breath held captive. He listened, mind racing through terrifying possibilities. Again, the sound. A delicate scraping, tracing the canvas inches from his head. His hand, trembling, fumbled for the flashlight. Its weak beam stabbed the interior wall where the sound had been, revealing only stretched fabric, empty space. He drew a ragged breath, battling rising panic. Then, louder this time, a definite pressure against the tent, as if testing its integrity. A visceral cold snaked down his spine. To stay inside was unthinkable, yet the thought of confronting whatever lay beyond the zipper was paralyzing. Steeling himself, he eased the zipper down a fraction, peering out. The flashlight beam trembled, cutting a shaky swath through the night. Nothing. Only the familiar shapes of trees, the glint of the stream, the vast, indifferent darkness. He lingered there, head exposed, straining to hear any betraying sound. Silence answered, deep, unnerving silence. Overreacting, he told himself, the mantra wearing thin. Just nerves. With immense reluctance, he retreated fully, zipping the tent tight, the flimsy barrier suddenly precious. Just as a fragile calm began to reclaim him, a new sound materialized, insidious and chilling, barely audible, woven into the night's fabric. A low whispering, indecipherable, perhaps not even human speech, perhaps just the wind's deceit. Yet it resonated with a terrifying intimacy, raising the hairs on his arms, freezing the blood in his veins. He lay perfectly still, straining to understand, to rationalize. But the longer it persisted, the more certain he became. A voice muttering, just beyond the threshold of hearing, undeniably there. His hand, slick with sweat, found the flashlight once more. Slowly, painstakingly, he unzipped the tent again, sweeping the beam outwards. Instantly, the whispering ceased. The ensuing silence was profound, heavy, worse than the sound itself. He scanned the campsite, the beam dancing nervously across the empty clearing, the impassive trees. Nothing moved. He pulled back inside, sealing the tent, clutching the flashlight like a talisman. Its light, a frail defense against the immense dark. Leave, back now and stumble through the blackness? The thought was more terrifying than waiting. Huddled in his sleeping bag, he kept vigil, listening to the oppressive silence, waiting for dawn, waiting for any proof he wasn't utterly alone. Sleep mercifully claimed him eventually. When his eyes opened, sunlight streamed through the trees, bathing the clearing in ordinary peaceful light. The terror of the night seemed spectral, unreal. A shaky relief washed over him. Whatever it was, it had passed with the darkness. He packed with frantic haste, eager to put distance between himself and this place. The hike back to the car was fraught with tension. Every rustle, every shadow, prompting furtive glances over his shoulder. The forest felt watchful, expectant. Reaching his car felt like surfacing for air. He threw his gear inside, started the engine. The mechanical roar, a reassuring sound against the quiet woods. Driving away, relief warred with a persistent unease, a sense that unseen eyes followed his departure from the tree line. Even now, miles and days away, closing his eyes conjures the memory. Not the fear, not the darkness, but the sound, that faint, sibilant whispering, an echo lodged permanently in the quietest corners of his mind. The sign buzzed, a fractured ruby promise against the deluge, casting pulsing, arterial light across the streaming asphalt. Elias's oasis, it proclaimed, though the final S had surrendered to darkness long ago. My gaze met Chloe's across the cramped car interior. The same disquiet I felt mirrored in her wide eyes. Stopping hadn't been the plan. Not here, but hours clawing through the night had frayed our nerves thin, leaving only exhaustion and a desperate thirst for caffeine. Just for coffee, I murmured, injecting a confidence into my voice that felt hollow. Quick in, quick out, back on the blacktop. Chloe offered a tight nod, her apprehension a tangible thing beside me. A wrongness clung to this place, prickling the skin at the nape of my neck. Yet, it was the sole beacon in miles of desolate highway, our fuel-gauged needle quivering perilously near empty. Choice felt like a distant luxury. A tarnished bell clanged above the door as we pushed inside, its sound instantly snagging the attention of the diner's sparse occupants. From a stool at the counter, an older gentleman pivoted, his scrutiny sharp before he turned back to his mug. In a corner booth, a knot of men abruptly ceased their low murmurs, their collective gaze sweeping over us. I became acutely aware of our otherness. Two young women, travel-worn and clearly adrift, swallowed by the dim, smoky light. I smoothed my wrinkled shirt, a useless gesture, as we navigated towards a vacant booth tucked away in the rear. The crimson vinyl beneath us was a road map of cracks. The tabletop tacky, with a residue I prayed was merely sugar. Almost instantly, a waitress materialized, pen hovering over a dog-eared pad. Her face a landscape of weariness. "What can I get you?" The question rasped, roughened by what sounded like decades of smoke. "Coffee," I managed. "Two, please." She gave a curt nod and shuffled off, her worn shoes whispering on the linoleum, leaving Chloe and me adrift in the stale air. The diner was a time capsule sealed somewhere around mid-century. Sepia photographs yellowed on the walls, flanking a hulking, silent jukebox. "Maya, I don't like it here," Chloe whispered, her voice tight as she leaned across the table. "Something feels off." I was poised to echo her sentiment when the waitress reappeared, mugs clattering onto the sticky surface. As she placed mine, her sleeve shifted, revealing a bloom of dark purple bruising stark against the pale skin of her wrist. She registered my glance, snatching her arm back, her gaze skittering away towards the men in the corner. "You two just traveling?" she asked, aiming for nonchalance, but her eyes held a nervous energy. "Yes, heading towards..." I began, only to be silenced by a sharp kick from Chloe beneath the table. The blunder hit me a second too late. Broadcasting our plans felt profoundly unwise. "Just driving," Chloe interjected smoothly, "seeing where the road takes us." The waitress nodded again, a fleeting expression. Was it relief, or perhaps fear, ghosting across her features? "Right, well, take care. Roads are tricky at night." She retreated, leaving her words hanging in the air, heavy, with an unspoken weight that seemed to surpass mere driving advice. We nursed the bitter coffee in a strained silence, every nerve humming. Then fragmented sounds began to coalesce from the surrounding quiet. Snippets of conversation, initially meaningless, sharpened into focus. The men in the corner booth spoke in hushed, urgent cadences. Phrases drifted. "Cargo arriving soon. And he gotta shift it before dawn." One mentioned a new delivery, followed by a harsh bark of laughter that scraped along my spine. I met Chloe's eyes. Her pallor confirmed she'd heard it too. Escape became an imperative, immediate need. But as my hand instinctively sought my pocket for the fare, a cold dread washed over me. My keys were gone. I distinctly recalled their familiar weight as we'd walked in. Now, nothing. "Chloe," I whispered, battling the rising tide of panic in my throat. "My keys. I can't find them." Her eyes widened. "What? Check again." I nodded, pulse hammering against my ribs. "They must have slipped out. Help me look." We searched with forced casualness, fingers probing the cracked vinyl crevices, eyes scanning the grimy floor beneath the table. Nothing. The bell above the door jangled once more. Relief surged briefly as a uniformed police officer stepped inside until I saw the easy nods. The shared, knowing glances exchanged with the men in the corner. The relief curdled into ice. He wasn't salvation. He was part of it. "We have to go," I breathed, the words barely audible. "Right now?" Chloe nodded, her face ashen. We rose, striving for an air of nonchalance as we moved towards the exit. Before we reached it, a figure detached itself from the corner booth, intercepting our path. "Leaving already?" he inquired. A smile fixed on his lips that didn't touch the coldness in his eyes. "Stick around. We don't get many fresh faces." The diner seemed to hold its breath. Every eye was on us. Behind the counter, The waitress stood frozen, a mask of fear and weary acceptance. The officer watched, detached, his hand resting near his sidearm. "We should really be heading off," Chloe said, her voice surprisingly firm. "Thanks for the coffee." We attempted to sidestep him, but he shifted, blocking us again. "Hold on," he countered, his tone hardening, shedding its thin veneer of welcome. "That ain't neighborly. Just trying to show some hospitality." A hand clamped onto my shoulder. I spun to find another man from the group looming behind us. Boxed in. Time warped, stretching thin. I saw the dull gleam of something metallic as one of them reached inside his jacket. The waitress turned her head away, unable to witness what might come next. The officer shifted his weight, straightening up. Then, unexpectedly, a voice cut through the tension. The older man from the counter, the one whose initial scrutiny had felt so sharp. "Let them pass, Silas," he commanded, his voice imbued with an unquestionable authority that silenced the room. "They're not worth the hassle." The man blocking us, Silas, wavered, his gaze flickering between us and the older man. "But Dad," he began. I said, "Let them go," the older man repeated, his tone final. "Got bigger concerns tonight." A taut moment stretched, Silas's jaw tight with suppressed fury. Then grudgingly, he stepped aside. "You heard him," he spat, the menace still thick in his voice. "Get out and don't come back this way." We needed no further urging. Chloe and I lunged for the door, the bell clanging frantically behind us. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. There, impossibly, resting clearly on the driver's seat, were my keys. Had they been there all along, or placed there deliberately? My hands trembled as I fumbled with the lock. We scrambled inside. As the engine got, sputtering to life, I saw the cluster of men spill from the diner's entrance, watching. The older man, Elias, stood framed in the doorway, his expression impenetrable in the pulsing red light. I slammed the gear stick into reverse, tires squealing on the wet asphalt as we fled the parking lot. My heart beat, a frantic drum against my ears. Miles dissolved beneath us in charged silence, the adrenaline slowly ebbing, leaving us raw and shaken. Only when the glow of Elias's oasis was a forgotten memory in the rearview mirror did Chloe finally turn to me, her voice thin. "Maya? What in God's name just happened?" I shook my head, the reality still struggling to cohere. "I don't know, but I think we just skirted the edge of something truly awful." We drove on through the lingering darkness, bypassing any further signs of life, until the lights of a larger town offered sanctuary. Checking into a nondescript motel, sleep remained elusive, exhaustion warring with the persistent hum of fear. The diner lingered, the weight of hostile stares, the sinister fragments of conversation, the bruised wrist, the older man's chilling authority. I never filed a report. Who would have taken us seriously? And what precisely would we have claimed happened? But even now, the sight of a solitary roadside eatery glowing against the night sky triggers an instinctive urge to accelerate. Some invitations, I learned, are best left unanswered. Some doors best left unopened. The iron vertebrae of the gate groaned, a rusted shriek tearing through the night's profound silence. I lingered, my shoe poised above the writer's green, swallowing the path to Blackwood Ridge Sanatorium. Before us, the structure slumped, a carcass against the skyline, its shattered windows like vacant sockets judging our trespass. A terrible certainty bloomed in my gut. This venture was ill-conceived. Yet the siren call of the unknown, amplified by my companion's urging, pulled me onward. "Don't you dare falter now, Elias." Cora's voice sliced the air from further up the path, her torchlight a frantic pulse against the decaying edifice. Drawing a ragged breath, I committed, crossing the threshold onto the grounds. The gate slammed behind me, a metallic punctuation mark that vibrated deep in my bones. We were four. Cora, our self-proclaimed navigator. Reese, her pragmatic shadow and bow. Seren, our chronicler with the camera perpetually poised. And myself, Elias, the cautious counterpoint perpetually ignored. This pilgrimage had brewed for weeks, sparked by Cora's discovery of an article detailing the sanatorium's shadowed narrative. Birthed in the 19th century, shuttered in the 70s amidst whispers of maltreatment and grotesque experimentation, Blackwood Ridge festered in local lore. Phantoms hunters and adolescent daredevils had probed its secrets, mostly thwarted by structural decay or the law's inconvenient presence. Tonight, however, felt different. A swollen moon bled just enough silver to guide our steps, and a whisper from Cora's cousin, badge-clad, promised minimal patrols. The moment hung ripe, a confluence of opportunity and morbid curiosity. As we neared the primary entrance, the sheer weight of history seemed to coalesce, pressing down like a physical force. Spray-painted tags, vibrant scars on weathered stone, offered a garish, futile mask over the institution's grim legacy. Serene raised her camera, the flash momentarily resurrecting the decrepit grandeur of the porch. "All right," Cora breathed, her voice tight with suppressed exhilaration. "The rules stand, we stay tethered. Minimal contact with anything. One voice calls retreat, we all turn back. Understood?" Nods rippled through our small group. Though Reese's skepticism was plain in the slight roll of his eyes, he deemed the spectral pursuit ludicrous. Yet the thought of Cora venturing within unaccompanied was unthinkable. The main doors were bound by thick chain, a challenge Reese met with practiced ease and the decisive snap of bolt cutters he'd produced. The links parted, clattering onto the stone with a resonance that seemed to stretch into the surrounding stillness. Cora applied pressure. The heavy door yielded, exhaling a lungful of stagnant, mildewed air upon us. To step inside was to breach the membrane of time itself. Our torch beams sliced through the gloom, illuminating a reception hall suspended in neglect. Dust-shrouded chairs stood sentinel along the walls. An archaic front desk presided, Its surface a collage of desiccated documents and the skeletal remains of long-dead flora. "Astounding," Serene whispered, the camera's shutter clicking like an anxious insect, as if they simply vanished mid-breath. We pressed inward, our footfalls swallowed by the vastness, echoing strangely off walls, shedding paint like sunburned skin. My light snagged on frantic letters gouged into the plaster. "Save me." A knot tightened in my stomach. I forced down the icy tendril snaking up my spine. The deeper we ventured, the more palpable the oppression became. The air thickened, heavy with the particulate ghosts of dust and dissolution. We navigated past former treatment rooms, their apparatus hulking and sinister in the fragmented light. An overturned gurney in a corridor startled us collectively, its ancient wheels emitting a faint groan as our passage disturbed its decades-long repose. "Look at this," Reese called out, his voice unnaturally amplified in the hush. He stood before a formidable metal door, its face brutally scarred by deep gouges. Someone was desperate to leave. As we converged, a detail prickled at my awareness. Unlike the pervasive grime coating everything else, this door possessed an unsettling cleanliness, a lack of accumulated dust. Before the thought could fully form, Cora was already shoving it inward. The space beyond was absolute void, consuming our light beams whole. Stepping across the threshold, I felt an immediate shift. The air turned colder, stirred by a subtle current, impossible within the sealed heart of the building. "Cora, I don't think—" My voice was a threadbare whisper. "Maybe we ought to—" The sentence remained unfinished. The heavy door crashed shut behind us with concussive force, plunging us into impenetrable blackness. Serene cried out, followed by the sharp clatter of her camera striking the floor. "What in God's name?" Reese's voice was taut, panic fraying its edges. "Cora? You there? Everyone all right?" My fingers trembled, fumbling with my torch until light finally bloomed. The beam swept across a reality utterly alien. Gone was the dilapidated sanatorium. We stood within what appeared to be a sterile contemporary laboratory, all gleaming chrome surfaces and the low thrum of unseen mechanisms. "This can't be," Cora breathed, her earlier bravado utterly dissolved. "Where are we?" No answer came. Instead, a portal hissed open at the room's far end. A silhouette emerged, thrown into stark relief by the light behind it, yet fundamentally wrong. Unnaturally tall, limbs elongated, jointed at impossible angles. "Welcome," it rasped, the sound metallic, abrasive, setting my teeth on edge. "Your arrival was anticipated." Raw terror ignited. We spun, desperate for the exit, only to find the door we'd entered through replaced by seamless, unyielding wall. Trapped. What ensued was a fractured nightmare. Strobe-like flashes, piercing alarms, and the omnipresent, chilling awareness of our inhuman captors. They propelled us through labyrinthine corridors, isolating us, subjecting us to examinations and processes my mind still refuses to fully excavate. Time dissolved. Hours bled into days, or perhaps mere moments stretched into an eternity, before I found myself inexplicably returned to that initial chamber, reunited with the others. We were altered, changed in ways both subtle and seismic. Seren's eyes pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence in the dimness. A strange metallic luster clung to Reese's skin. Cora. Cora was present yet fundamentally absent, the core of her extinguished. The figure stood observing, its blank facade somehow projecting clinical amusement. The parameters are met. The experiment concludes. It stated, departure is permitted. And just like that, we were expelled, standing once more before the derelict sanatorium under the indifferent moon, as if the preceding horror had been a shared hallucination. But the truth resonated within us. The building's windows now held a faint, unearthly glow. A low, mechanical hum emanated from its depths. We retreated, stumbling, each adrift in the wreckage of our own psyche, grappling with the violation. Reaching the gate, I risked a final glance backward. The sanatorium seemed to waver, its familiar lines blurring, shifting. For a fleeting second, I perceived its true form. Not a ruin, but a sophisticated illusion, masking something infinitely more complex and alien than human minds could readily conceive. We never dissected that night, not truly. Words felt inadequate, belief impossible. Yet sometimes, catching the strange light in Serene's gaze, or noticing the way illumination catches Reese's skin with an unnatural sheen, the reality crashes back. And late, when the moon hangs high and the world holds its breath, I sometimes fancy I hear it. That grating metallic voice beckoning me back to Blackwood Ridge, back to the crucible where reality fractured, and where, I suspect, a fragment of my being remains captive. I cannot say if we unearthed a deeply buried secret or blundered into a reality never intended for human eyes. I know only this. The next time an abandoned place whispers promises of adventure, I will turn and run. Some unknowns are best left undisturbed. Some doors irrevocably sealed. Yet, even as I embrace this caution, a chilling conviction persists. Our ordeal at Blackwood was merely an overture. Elsewhere, in other forgotten structures and shadowed corners, similar procedures may be unfolding. And I wonder, with a sickening blend of terror and morbid fascination, what happens when the architects of these horrors tire of concealment? For now, I strive for normalcy, head down. But vigilance is my new shadow, forever scanning the periphery for signs that the world's facade is thinner than we believe. Because once you've glimpsed behind the veil, ignorance is a luxury lost forever. Ultimately, the most terrifying discovery wasn't contained within those walls. It's the certainty that it remains, waiting, patient, for the next curious souls to push open the wrong door. Sleep, that elusive balm, deserted me again. 3 o'clock, precisely. The ceiling above my bed became a stage for a grim nocturne. The metronomic tread of heavy boots across ancient floorboards. Back, forth, 6 months I'd resided within the aged brick embrace of the Marlowe, apartment 4B, and nightly, this spectral cadence held its vigil. Initially, a shrug dismissed it, merely a neighbor keeping unorthodox hours. Yet, an unsettling quality permeated those footfalls, an insidious rhythm that burrowed beneath the skin. I lay rigid, tracing the constellations of water stains overhead as the familiar pattern commenced. 8 measured paces, presumably from bedroom to living space. A pregnant pause, then 8 paces returning. Each step groaned protest from the timbers above. The tempo, immutable. The duration, infinite. My phone cast a pale glow. 4:13 a.m. Something inside me fractured. Blankets were flung aside, a shirt pulled hastily over my head, and I burst into the corridor's sepulchral silence, broken only by that damnable marching overhead. Flickering fluorescence threw knife-sharp shadows against the peeling floral paper. 23 steps, my bare soles whispering against the cool, slightly tacky linoleum, carried me to the stairwell. The 5th floor descended into deeper gloom. Half the bulbs were lifeless voids, neglected monuments to indifference. Here, the sound intensified, emanating unmistakably from 5B, the apartment directly crowning my own. My fist struck the solid wood door, the report echoing down the deserted hallway. Silence answered, save for the relentless pacing. Again, I hammered, knuckles stinging. Nothing. The invisible sentry continued its patrol, deaf or deliberately dismissive. Hello? My voice, raw, tore through the quiet. It's past 4 in the morning. Some people need sleep. Not a falter in the rhythm. 8 steps forward, pause, 8 steps back. A door creaked open further down the hall. Mr. Petrov, the building superintendent, materialized, clad in striped pajamas, a heavy ring of keys glinting in his grasp. His salt and pepper hair stood in disarray. Mr. Thorne, what's the commotion at this hour? Someone in 5B, I choked out, gesturing wildly. Pacing, for hours, every single night. I can't stand it anymore. Mr. Petrov's brow furrowed, etching deep lines. 5B? That's not possible. What do you mean? I hear them right now. The footfalls seemed to mock my assertion, steady and clear. Apartment 5B, he stated, his voice low, has stood vacant for 3 years, ever since the Cardenas family left. I gaped at him. The phantom dread continued, echoing in the narrow space between us. But I hear. He sifted through his keys, selecting one, and turned the lock. The door groaned open, on protesting hinges. We peered into absolute emptiness. Dust lay thick as velvet on the bare hardwood. No furniture, no occupants, only stark walls and cobwebs festooning the corners like macabre decorations. Yet the footsteps persisted, audibly, impossibly, right there before us. Mr. Petrov's face drained of color. Wordlessly, he slammed the door shut, the lock clicking with finality. The Cardenas family, he murmured, a tremor in his voice. Vanished overnight. No warning. Just gone. Left everything behind. We had to clear it all out. Why? Why did they leave? He shook his head, eyes darting towards the door. Claimed they saw things, heard things. Mrs. Cardenas was beside herself. Said the place felt wrong. I thought they were just inventing excuses to break the lease. A haunted look crossed his features. Perhaps they weren't. Retreating to my own apartment offered no solace. Sleep was a distant shore. My laptop screen illuminated the darkness as I delved into the Marlowe's past. Built 1928, seemingly unremarkable, another pre-war edifice in a somnolent neighborhood. Then a discovery, a brittle newspaper scan from 1956. Murder, 5th floor. A man, Arthur Crow, had slain his wife in apartment 5B before hanging himself in the bedroom. The article noted neighbor complaints preceding the tragedy. Sounds of violent arguments and later, incessant pacing, night after night. Above me, the steps echoed. 8 forward, pause, 8 back. A sick day excused me from work, sending me instead to the hushed sanctuary of the public library. A helpful librarian guided me through dusty archives. More fragments emerged. 1956, the first tenants after the murder fled within weeks, citing nocturnal footsteps. 1962, another abrupt departure. 1975, 1988, 1994, 2003, 2021. A chilling litany, different faces, different eras, identical complaints, always the footsteps, sometimes more, pockets of unnatural cold, objects shifting inexplicably. The faint sound of weeping in the dead of night. A woman in 94 swore she'd seen a man standing silhouetted in her bedroom doorway. The light revealed only emptiness. The Cardenas family, the most recent casualties, had endured 8 months. A local news piece quoted Mrs. Cardenas describing visions of a man lurking in corners, watching. Their daughter grew terrified of her own room. Their son spoke of someone sitting on his bed at night. Mr. Cardenas reported disembodied whispers when alone. That night, the 3 a.m. ritual began anew. Lying awake, the history I'd unearthed imbued the sounds with a dreadful weight. Each step felt freighted with purpose, with simmering rage and undying guilt. I pictured Arthur Crow, trapped in an eternal reenactment of his final hours. Sleep remained impossible. Morning brought resolve. I called the landlord, gave my notice. He registered no surprise, readily agreeing to a full security deposit refund if I vacated by week's end. Packing commenced immediately. Amid stacks of books, a flicker of movement snagged my periphery. A dark shape lingering in my bedroom doorway. I spun around. Nothing. A trick of light, I rationalized. Yet the air in the room had grown distinctly colder. That night, the pattern shifted. The pacing didn't confine itself to the area above my living room. It migrated, purposefully, towards the bedroom space overhead, towards the very spot where Crow had murdered his wife. My blanket became a flimsy shield pulled tight. The steps drew nearer, halting directly above my bed. Silence descended, thick and expectant. Then a different sound. The faint, slow creak of floorboards, as if someone were turning deliberately in place. A terrifying certainty gripped me. Whatever resided above was no longer just pacing. It was listening. It was waiting. A soft thump emanated from the corner of my own room. My head snapped towards the source. For one heart-stopping instant, I perceived him. A tall, male shadow figure. Then, obliteration. Scrambling from bed, fumbling with trembling hands, I flooded the room with light. The corner stood empty. Yet the atmosphere remained charged, heavy like the air before a violent storm. The footsteps resumed above, altered again. They moved from the spot over my bed to the corner where a figure had manifested. 8 steps, the same count that had tormented me for months. But now, comprehension dawned with sickening clarity. This wasn't aimless wandering. It was a path. From the bed to the corner. The precise distance one might traverse carrying a heavy burden. Or a body. The remainder of the night I spent huddled in my car. Daylight spurred further research. Arthur Crow had strangled his wife in their bed. He then carried her lifeless form to the bedroom corner, leaving her there while he penned a confession. Finally, he hanged himself from a ceiling pipe. 3 days passed before their discovery. Movers were hired. I couldn't bear another moment within those walls. I watched from my car across the street as they worked, my gaze fixed on the vacant windows of 5B. As twilight bled across the sky, a shadow flickered behind the grimy glass. Back and forth. 8 steps forward, 8 steps back. The pattern, visible even from the street. By 8 p.m., they were finished. I forced myself through one final walkthrough of the barren apartment. Dust motes danced in the dim light. Scuff marks marred the walls like old scars. Standing in the bedroom doorway, I stared at the corner. That corner, for the first time since my arrival. The apartment above was utterly silent. As I turned to leave, the temperature plummeted. My breath bloomed white. The air thickened, pressing in. A distinct creak sounded directly behind me. I didn't hesitate. Down the 23 steps, through the lobby, out into the night. Starting the car, pulling away from the curb, I risked one last glance upwards. A man stood framed in the 5th floor window, observing my departure. Even at that distance, his face was unnervingly clear. He smiled. A hotel room offered anonymous refuge. Around 3 a.m., I jolted awake. Silence. Blessed, profound silence. Broken only by the air conditioner's hum and the distant sigh of traffic. My new apartment lies across town. Smaller, pricier, the commute longer, but nights pass in undisturbed quiet. Yet, dreams sometimes resurrect the phantom tread. 8 steps forward, 8 steps back. In these nocturnal replays, I'm no longer in my bed below. I am in 5B, watching Arthur Crow pace. He cradles something heavy, wrapped. Reaching the corner, he turns, fixes his gaze upon me, and smiles that same chilling smile. Curiosity, or perhaps compulsion, led me to check the building records again last week. Since my flight, 3 different families had attempted to inhabit 5B. None lasted beyond a month. The apartment stands empty once more. But late at night, observers on the street below sometimes report a shadow drifting behind the window panes. 8 steps forward, 8 steps back, ceaselessly until the dawn breaks. I used to drive past the Marlowe sometimes, on sleepless nights, counting the windows up to the 5th floor, to 5B. Often dark, but occasionally I'd see him pacing his unending circuit. Once, he seemed to notice my vigil. He paused at the window, raising a hand as if in greeting to an old acquaintance. I don't drive by anymore. Mr. Petrov, the superintendent, quit last month. A chance encounter in a coffee shop revealed a man diminished, aged by more than time. He confided that they couldn't keep tenants in 4B now either. The complaints were eerily familiar. Footsteps in the dead of night. Not from above, this time. From the corners of the bedroom itself. Pacing, they said. 8 steps forward, 8 steps back. I asked if in all his years he'd ever personally witnessed anything in 5B. He hesitated, stirring his coffee for a long moment. Then he recounted the night he'd gone to clear the Cardenas family's abandoned possessions. Alone in the apartment, dismantling a bed frame, he heard footsteps approach from behind. Turning, he saw a man carrying something swaddled in a blanket. The figure walked to the corner, gently deposited its burden, and turned to face Petrov, and smiled. Petrov fled, leaving everything. The owner hired an outside cleaning crew. They worked only in daylight, windows flung open, every light blazing. Even so, 2 workers walked off the job before the apartment was finally emptied. Months have passed since I last set foot near the Marlowe, but sometimes, in the deep stillness of my new apartment, a faint sound seems to drift on the edge of hearing. Distant footsteps, 8 forward, 8 back, imagination, I insist. Memory, playing cruel tricks, until last night. 3 a.m. jolted me awake. The air in my bedroom felt unnaturally cold, thick. And there, coalescing in the corner's deepest shadows, stood a familiar silhouette. It slowly raised its hand. 8 steps forward, 8 steps back. I'm moving again next week. The metronome pulse of my trainers on asphalt faltered, the rhythm shattering like dropped glass. Behind me, sharp and distinct in the cooling air, the crackle of a dry twig surrendering its form. My breath hitched. A frantic bird seemed to beat against my ribs. Viridian Park, usually my verdant lung within the city's stone rib cage, suddenly felt suffocating. Its familiar paths twisting into menacing possibilities under a deepening twilight. A fleeting glance backward snagged on a flicker of movement. A shape, dark and indistinct, melting behind the bole of an ancient oak. My evening run, my ritual of release, had just warped into something primal. A chase where I was no longer the pursuer of endorphins, but the pursued. My name is Elara. The simple joy of motion, the body finding its cadence, breath weaving in and out, the world softening at the periphery as the path ahead commands focus. This alchemy of running had always been my solace. It dissolved the day's accumulated stresses, the residue of long hours spent navigating corporate corridors. It was my untangling. Viridian Park had been the backdrop to this ritual since my arrival in the sprawling metropolis 3 years prior. Its veins of pathways were etched into my memory. From the sun-dappled thoroughfares near the entrances to the whispering, secluded capillaries deeper within its green heart. Caution usually dictated sticking to illuminated, populated routes when dusk bled into evening. But today's anxieties had been particularly corrosive, demanding the deeper balm of the park's remote embrace. A choice freighted with unforeseen consequence. The sun, a molten coin slipping below the jagged skyline, cast elongated dancing shadows as I entered the park's embrace. The usual diaspora of joggers, ambling dog walkers, and lingering tourists was dispersing, drawn homeward. I inhaled a burgeoning quiet, the cool kiss of the air on flushed skin, and set off along my preferred, less trodden trail. Perhaps 2 miles in, the first tendrils of unease surfaced. Subtle, initially, just a prickling sensation, an awareness of unseen observation raising the fine hairs on my neck. Paranoia, I chided myself, shaken it off. Yet, rounding a curve dense with rhododendrons, I heard it. Steps. Not quite synchronized with my own, ghosting my pace from somewhere behind. Instinctively, I accelerated, seeking distance. The phantom footsteps quickened in response. My heart hammered now, a frantic drumbeat unrelated to physical exertion. I risked another look, a swift, fearful pivot. A figure, perhaps 50 yards distant, flowed along the path, mirroring my increased speed. Then came the definitive sound, the twig's sharp report, confirming the fear coiling in my gut. This was no coincidence. No fellow athlete sharing the trail. I was being hunted. Panic surged, cold and electric, illuminating my vulnerability. Alone, swallowed by the park's deepening shadows, the sun now a fading memory below the horizon. No one near enough to hear a cry. Fragments of a self-defense seminar from years past surfaced like debris in a flood. Keys bristling between knuckles, aim for eyes, groin, shout fire, not help. People react faster to perceived property damage than personal peril. Useless knowledge if the confrontation never allowed proximity. I plunged off the manicured path, gambling on the tangled sanctuary of the woods. Branches lashed my face like skeletal fingers as I crashed through the undergrowth, lungs searing, pushing my body beyond any previous limit. I heard him gaining, the heavier thud of his pursuit closing the gap. He was faster, his stride consuming the ground between us with terrifying efficiency. Desperation birthed a new strategy. Instead of burrowing deeper into the wilderness, I pivoted sharply, angling back towards the park's more frequented arteries. Light, people, safety. If I could just reach them. But he anticipated the shift. As I burst from the tree line onto a wider, graveled path, he was there. A dark sentinel barring my escape. In the bruised twilight, I saw him, truly saw him. Tall, leanly built, clad entirely in black, his features obscured by a face mask. It was his eyes, though, that arrested me, locking my terror into place. Chips of obsidian, devoid of warmth, fixed with an acquisitive hunger that turned my blood to ice water. Nowhere left to scurry, he rasped, the sound like stones grinding together, vibrating down my spine. I retreated, frantic eyes scanning for a makeshift weapon, an alternative escape. Trapped, him before me, a steep, eroded embankment tumbling down to a hidden creek behind me. He advanced. In a synapse flash decision, I spun and launched myself down the incline, half running, half sliding in a cascade of loose earth and tearing vegetation. Reckless, perilous, but the only door left open. A curse spat from above as he followed. The creek water was a gasp-inducing shock, shallow but swift-moving, glacial against my heated skin. The jolt ignited a fresh surge of adrenaline, pure survival instinct taking over. I scrambled up the opposing bank, mud sucking greedily at my trainers, sodden clothes clinging like a leaden shroud. Blind flight now, direction irrelevant, only distance mattered. The park dissolved into a labyrinth of looming shapes and whispering shadows. Every rustle, every distant snap sent shivers of renewed terror through my exhausted frame. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into an eternity of burning lungs and trembling legs. Fear was the fuel now, the stark knowledge that stopping meant extinction. Then, like a mirage solidifying, lights glimmered ahead. The park's boundary, the city street beyond. Salvation, tantalizingly close. A few hundred yards. I drove myself onward, ignoring the screaming protest of my muscles, the sharp stitch tearing at my side. But a gnarled root, unseen in the gloom, reached out, my foot caught. Momentum betrayed me. I went down, hard, pain, white-hot and blinding, shot through my ankle, not broken, but twisted, useless. I struggled to rise, hearing his approach, breathing heavy, but controlled. He hadn't depleted himself as I had. He'd savored this, letting me run myself ragged. His shadow fell over me, a final eclipse. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. Then, sound. Voices, carried on the night air. Laughter, conversation, impossibly normal, drifting from the street as a group entered the park. My pursuer froze, his head snapping between me, prone and helpless, and the approaching sounds of civilization. That hesitation was my opening. Summoning a final ragged reserve of strength, I screamed. Not words, but a sound torn from the deepest well of terror. Raw, primal, a desperate clarion call against the darkness. The voices abruptly ceased. Shouts of alarm followed, the thud of approaching footsteps. My attacker uttered a low curse, then melted back into the park's shadows, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. The aftermath unfolded in a dizzying sequence. The wail of sirens cutting through the night. The calm efficiency of paramedics. A barrage of questions I could barely process through the fog of shock. Hospital lights, the diagnosis, exhaustion, dehydration, a severely sprained ankle. The police took my statement, offered reassurances of increased patrols, but the caveat hung heavy. Without a face, a name, just a fleeting impression of cold eyes, the odds were slim. In the ensuing days and weeks, the trauma reverberated. The city I'd navigated with casual confidence now felt predatory. Every shadow seemed to lengthen unnaturally. Every anonymous face held a potential threat. Running, my former refuge, became unthinkable. The park an arena of remembered terror. Slowly, painstakingly, aided by therapy, bolstered by the unwavering support of friends and family, I began the arduous process of reclaiming myself. I enrolled in intensive self-defense training, transforming abstract knowledge into muscle memory. A personal alarm and pepper spray became constant companions. Eventually, tentatively, I laced up my running shoes again, but never alone, never near those secluded trails again. The man cloaked in darkness, the hunter from that night, remained uncaught, a phantom haunting the edges of my memory. He surfaces sometimes in dreams, a relentless shadow forever closing the distance, but the fear he sowed will not be allowed to take root and strangle my life. I am a survivor, etched with the knowledge of the world's sharp edges, particularly for women moving through it. But alongside that knowledge, I carry resilience, a strength forged in terror, because the most vital race is the one for your own life, and that is a race I am determined to keep winning. Dust motes pirouetted in the weak Saturday sun, slanting through the grimy window pane as Elias entered the luthier's domain. A sleepless night, a barren stretch in his compositional work, had left his throat feeling like sandpaper. The air hung thick with the venerable scent of aged timber and rosin dust. Violins, violas, cellos, a silent orchestra bearing the scars of time and use, lined the walls, their finishes dulled or crazed. Somewhere, a small heater emitted a low, persistent thrum against the occasional flicker of the overhead fluorescence. His gaze roamed, a restless scavenger seeking an ember, a spark, anything. Bows lay scattered like fallen reeds against a chipped countertop. And then, tucked away on a rack near the shadowed rear, it caught his eye. A violin, undeniably old, yet its wear spoke of something other than mere passage of years. Its varnish possessed a strange matte quality, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The carvings adorning the scroll and back were executed with unnerving precision, intricate yet alien. Elias squinted, tracing the minuscule swirls and symbols that seemed to writhe just beyond comprehension. A peculiar current seemed to hum from the instrument, prickling the skin of his fingertips, an insistent invitation. He approached the shopkeeper, Mr. Silas, a stooped figure whose jacket wore a permanent mantle of dust, his eyes magnified behind spectacles thick as bottle bottoms. "I'm searching," Elias began, his voice raspy, "for an instrument with a certain history, character." Mr. Silas offered a slow, ambiguous shrug that might have meant anything. "Try whichever calls to you," he murmured, gesturing vaguely. Elias reached for a strange violin. Its weight felt substantial, unexpected. The intricate carvings pressed, almost branded, against his palm. The wood grain beneath felt subtly coarse. A phantom scent clung to it. Elusive, not resin or wood, but something akin to scorched ozone or distant, cold incense. Tucking it beneath his chin, the ebony rest felt startlingly cool against his skin. He plucked the open strings. A peculiar resonance shivered through him, tightening something low in his gut. A dissonant echo blooming briefly in the shop's oppressive quiet, distinct from the heater's drone. Bowing a simple scale, a soft, spectral delay trailed each note, as if the violin were whispering a hushed imitation. Ignoring the rise in unease, he glanced up, catching a fleeting, inscrutable expression on Mr. Silas's face. Don't know much about that one, the old man volunteered softly. Been here a long while. The price named was surprisingly modest. Elias didn't haggle. He paid, the transaction feeling strangely inevitable, and carried his acquisition out into the indifferent morning. Back in the confines of his apartment, a space defined by a composition-strewn desk, a threadbare armchair, and the weak circle cast by a solitary lamp, he laid the violin upon the worn sofa fabric and simply stared. No proper place existed for display, so it leaned there, an enigmatic guest. The carvings drew his eye relentlessly, intricate spirals interlocking in patterns that felt both mathematical and mad. Unease warred with a feverish excitement, his pulse quickening. He threw open a window, letting in the city's breath. The distant blare of horns, the rumble of passing traffic. Seeking refuge in routine, Elias retrieved the violin for warm-up exercises, launching into a piece he'd been wrestling with. Almost immediately, he sensed it, the tone darkening with each passage. This wasn't mere subjective interpretation. The sound itself transmuted, growing deeper, almost guttural, as if the instrument possessed its own pharynx. A tremor started in his hands. He paused, forcing slow, deliberate breaths, feeling beads of sweat gather at his hairline. The phantom echo from the shop returned, faint but undeniable, each note shadowed by its whisper-soft duplicate. An acoustic impossibility in his cramped, curtain-draped room. Heart hammering, he rested the violin on his lap. He busied himself with tuning, the slow turn of the pegs, the rising tension of the strings offering a fragile anchor. But the tightness in his chest remained. He compelled himself to practice. The hours dissolving until dusk painted the room in shades of grey. Eyes aching with fatigue, he finally nested the violin in its case, snapping the latches shut with decisive clicks. Sleep offered no sanctuary. Near 3, in the Stygian quiet, consciousness surfaced abruptly. He was sitting bolt upright on the edge of his bed, the violin cradled in his hands. Moonlight, filtered through the gap in his curtains, silvered the instrument's surface. He blinked, disoriented, memory a frustrating blank. When had he risen? How had the violin come to be here? A fog clouded his thoughts. He realized, with a jolt, that his fingers were moving, drawing a mournful, dragging air from the strings, notes sweeping low and long. His throat constricted. His hands trembled violently. Taking a ragged breath, he forced the instrument back into its case, slid it beneath the bed frame, and burrowed under the covers, body rigid. The final lingering note seemed to resonate still, impossibly close. A phantom vibration in the hollow of his ear. Morning found him leaden, unrested, a knot of stiffness in his neck. The violin case lay partially open beneath the bed. He was certain he'd secured it. Nausea churned. He rose, rubbed the grit from his eyes, dressed mechanically. Breakfast was a formality. Toast remained largely untouched. His phone pulsed with notifications, ignored. His attention snagged inevitably on the violin. Perhaps understanding it was the only way. He retrieved the case, placed it on his desk, lifted the lid. It looked inert, ordinary, save for those unsettling carvings. He decided to clean it. A meticulous ritual with a soft cloth, checking the bridge, the strings. All seemed physically sound. Then, nestled in a small compartment, he found it. a slip of brittle parchment bearing cryptic sigils mirroring those etched into the wood. No explanation, just the same looping esoteric designs. He put it aside, baffled. Practice began again. Initial scales sounded normal, clear, but as he navigated more intricate passages, the spectral echo reasserted itself, a parasitic harmony only he could perceive. His throat went dry. He fought to concentrate, but the phantom sound swelled in his awareness, like a second violin playing just over his shoulder. Setting the instrument down, he pressed his fingers to his throbbing temples, his palms clammy. He decided to record himself, seeking objective proof or dismissal. The playback revealed only his solitary performance, stark and unadorned, yet in the room, the chilling acoustic illusion persisted. He found himself glancing back, half expecting an unseen accompanist, alone. By the session's end, the violin's voice had deepened further, the typically bright E string now sounding muted, veiled. Wiping sweat from his brow, he paced the small apartment, seeking clarity. Water from the fridge did little to quell the inner turmoil. He needed distance. The violin went back into its case. The latches clicked firmly shut. He buried it deep within his bedroom closet, behind a barricade of old coats. That afternoon, Elias attempted composition. Notes appeared on the manuscript paper, but the melodies felt hollow, lifeless. His focus drifted, inevitably, towards the bedroom door. A cold dread coiled in his stomach. He put on music, loud, needing to drown out the silence, the potential for phantom sounds. The day bled away slowly. No more practice. Television offered fleeting distraction, but concentration fractured. Sporadically, he imagined a faint, sustained tone emanating from the closet. He'd killed the TV, strained his ears in the ensuing silence. Nothing. Only the insistent throb behind his eyes. Later, much later, exhaustion claimed him in the armchair. A sharp, resonant twang jolted him awake. He gasped, clutching the violin, nearly dropping it. His chest seized, his hands were ice cold. The living room lamp cast a stark, unwavering light. He must have drifted off with it on. Again, the unsettling amnesia. No memory of retrieving the instrument. Disorientation washed over him. He took deep, shuddering breaths, pulse hammering against his eardrums, skin prickling. The room was utterly still, yet the violin felt preternaturally warm in his grasp, as if recently played for hours. His fingertips were tender. With conscious effort, he placed it on the low coffee table. He paced, floorboards groaning beneath his weight, thoughts a tangled mess. Was he losing his grip? He flicked on every light in the apartment, kitchen, bathroom, desk lamp, a desperate bulwark against the encroaching shadows. Darkness felt intolerable. His gaze kept returning to the violin, inert on the table. Scrolling through his phone offered no escape. The instrument exerted a gravitational pull on his attention. It felt sentient, watchful, an irrational but potent conviction. Nothing moved, yet every nerve remained taut. He sat again, picking it up, a surge of defiance rising. He would master this, understand it. An A minor scale. The tone was darker than ever, sepulchral, heavy. Each note vibrated through his fingers, raising the hairs on his arms. The echo returned, stronger now, a palpable hum hovering in the air itself. breath hitched in his throat. The nape of his neck tingled, his bowing arm faltered, the horsehair skittering scratchily across the string. He stopped abruptly. The echo lingered for a beat. A resonant sigh, then slowly dissipated. Hand pressed to his chest, feeling the frantic rhythm beneath. He muttered aloud, wondering if this was madness, if others had known such things. The window reflected only his own strained face against the backdrop of the sleeping city. Sleep remained elusive that night. He paced, a restless sentinel in his overlit apartment. The violin a constant presence on the coffee table. He hadn't the will to put it away. It seemed to belong there now, demanding visibility. His eyes burned with fatigue. Around 2, faint susurrations began, sibilant and indistinct, like secrets breathed just beyond the veil of hearing. From the next room, he pressed his ear to the wall. Silence. The sound, he realized with a sickening lurch, originated from the violin. Turning slowly, he saw it resting there, quiescent. Gooseflesh prickled his arms anew, pulse pounding. He swallowed, approached it, lifted it. A definite, unnatural warmth radiated from the wood. "Is someone there?" he whispered, the words feeling foolish. Addressed to inanimate timber. Only his own ragged breathing and the refrigerator's hum answered. He tried playing a familiar, simple piece. The notes felt alien under his fingers. His left hand ached, fingertips raw, his bowing arm throbbed with fatigue. Sweat trickled down his temple. The echo intensified, no longer a whisper, but a clear, resonant twin playing in unison, slightly offset. He stopped, clutching the violin hard against his chest, heart thundering. The spectral sound persisted, filling the small room before finally decaying into silence. Gritting his teeth, he placed the instrument back on the table, staring at it, waiting for the last vibration to cease. Days bled into one another. Each practice session deepened the violin's timbre, rendering it almost muffled, yet imbued with a strange, vibrant undercurrent. The whispers became a nightly occurrence, sometimes seeming to issue from the case, sometimes materializing directly behind him. His body existed in a perpetual state of high alert, hands unsteady, stomach clenched. Coffee became a necessity, fueling wakefulness against the dread of sleep, the fear of waking again with the instrument in his hands. Locking it away proved futile. The sounds, real or imagined, seeped through wood and fabric. He felt ensnared. One evening, attempting to compose, he scribbled notes, humming a tentative melody. His pen tapped rhythmically. Then he heard it, the violin, from within its closed case, echoing his hummed phrase. His throat closed. He froze. The case sat inert, latches secured, yet the sound was unmistakable. His eyes darted wildly around the empty room. He approached the case, flicked the latches, opened it slowly. The violin lay still, touching it. He felt that faint, residual warmth. Thoughts raced, fragmented. He slammed the lid shut, stepped back. Certainty crystallized. The violin wanted something. What, he couldn't fathom. He clung to rationality, old wood, unusual carvings, subjective acoustic phenomena, sleep deprivation, stress. These were the tangible facts. Yet the heat was real, the sounds insistent, his body's reaction undeniable. No explanation presented itself. Late one night, slumped on the floor against the sofa, staring at the closed case, exhaustion weighing him down, muscles screaming, eyes heavy. He drifted towards sleep's edge, only to be snagged back by a whisper. His name, faint yet clear, emanating from the case. His heart leaped. He scrambled upright too quickly, head swimming. He gripped the sofa arm, steadying himself against the dizziness, the pounding in his skull. His breathing sounded unnaturally loud, shaky. The case remained still, the whisper dissolved. Sweat slicked his palms. With no other recourse, he went to it, opened it, lifted the violin out. Tremors shook his hands. He settled it onto his shoulder and began to play. The melody from that first night, the one he hadn't consciously learned but knew intimately now. Slow, dark, hypnotic. The echo surged louder than ever before, a resonant shadow enveloping him. His muscles screamed with tension. He played until his fingers refused to obey, until numbness crept up his arm. When silence finally fell, the apartment felt colder, his teeth chattering. He let the violin rest on the floor beside him, collapsed back against the sofa, staring blankly at the ceiling. Body spent, mind relentlessly wired. He listened. The last vestiges of the echo faded. He closed his eyes, but sleep was a distant shore. The following day, he refused to touch it. He left it out on the sofa, a brooding presence. Faint murmurs still brushed against his hearing when he passed near it. The thought of disposal surfaced, returning it, selling it, but the idea of inflicting this upon another felt wrong, and deeper still, a perverse bond had formed. He had composed more, wrestled with more potent music in these haunted days than in months prior. The work was dark, unsettling, yet undeniably authentic, felt deep in his marrow. He still hears Elias in his small apartment. The violin sits on a chair across the room, its strange carvings seeming to shift in the dim evening light, each swirl and groove holding his gaze. He tries not to look too long. Tonight, he will record a new piece, one born from a fevered half-dream. He anticipates the echo's return, the race in pulse, the damp palms. Stopping is no longer an option. This instrument, this entity, might be drawing him towards something perilous. Yet it has ignited his dormant creativity, given him direction. A tightness constricts his chest when he considers the path ahead, the potential cost of continuing. But putting it away for good feels impossible now. Even with the case closed, the resonance persists in his mind. So, he will play. He will listen. He will wait to see what truth, if any, resides within the wood, within the whispers, locked inside those ancient carvings. The struggle feels exhausting, futile. He will follow the sound, hoping sanity remains his companion on the journey. There is no turning back.